Mark, thank you so much for making time to be here today. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you. For people listening today, today's conversation between me, Alexander, CEO of Babylon Microfarms, and Mark Freeman, who is a pioneer in the food service world and has done a lot of things on on-site farming. And I'm not going to butcher your background, Mark, so maybe I can hand it over to you. I'd love to hear just a little bit more about your journey in the world of food service and specifically some of the projects you've worked on over the years relating to indoor farming at some of the places that you've worked.
Yeah, certainly. Well, thank you for having me, Alexander. It's nice to be here and good to see you on screen. So yeah, so my background, I've been in food service pretty much my whole life. Started in restaurants when I was in high school. Got a degree, and then once I left college, it was like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do now? And so I went to the college food service. At the college I went to, the Evergreen State College in Olympia, and talked to the food service director there, and she ended up hiring me. And so I fed college kids for about 26 years as a contractor, and then had a family and decided that I didn't want to work 18-hour days, and so I jumped over to corporate food service and fed as a contractor, fed the corporate America, if you will. It was like I had died and gone to heaven. I had 2 meals a day. I had nights off, weekends off. I was home on Mother's Day. It was fantastic. So it was great. And then as I moved around a little bit in the corporate world, I was in Salt Lake City, and then I moved to Corvallis, Oregon, where I ran the Hewlett Packard plant in Corvallis, and they had an opening to be a client, to be on the HP side instead of the contractor side. So I took the opportunity and jumped ship, went to Hewlett Packard, ran their global food program, I guess for about 7 or 8 years. Took some time off. I decided I wanted to try out the consulting world. So I did that for a couple of years, and then the opportunity came up at Microsoft. And so I spent 13 years at Microsoft, and I'll go into a little bit of that in here in just a minute. But then I left Microsoft, well, I was going to retire. I guess I retired for about 4 hours, and then I went to the Ford Motor Company, and worked for them for a couple of years. And then in the middle of COVID, I decided that I would retire again. And so I tried that for about 4 months this time. And then I went to LinkedIn, which is kind of back in the family with Microsoft. LinkedIn is owned by Microsoft. And so it was kind of like going back, but they were managed completely different. And so then I had the opportunity to spend quite a bit of time actually with LinkedIn. Retired again, and now I'm back in the consulting world doing consulting for DAYONE Hospitality Consulting. So yeah, it's kind of been of a fun journey for sure.
That's amazing. Thank you for that. And so you've worked at some of the kind of heavyweights of American tech and industry. When you were kind of getting started there, what are the sort of goals that you set out to achieve, and how do these companies typically view the food service element of their business?
Yeah, I'll kind of talk to Microsoft. When I went into Microsoft, one of the strategies that I had in my head was that I wanted to be able to incorporate software into the food program. To be, food service normally in the corporate world is a cost center. So we cost the company money, and I wanted to flip that around and have us become a profit center. So being able to help the salespeople sell software, and over time, actually, we were able to achieve that. In that, we incorporated software into pretty much everything that we did in the cafes, and so once the sales guys got wind of it, they were really anxious to bring their customers into the cafes. I mean, normally you sit in a executive briefing center and you look at PowerPoints all day long, and they that's how they sell. But in this case, at lunch we broke, and then they came down into the cafe. They brought their clients down into the cafe, and they could see the software in operation and how we're actually using it, right? And so, in my mind, I became a profit center because I helped them sell software and and bring excitement, I guess, to the idea of software and what we were actually doing at Microsoft. We were actually using our software, in the program. So that was really one of the basic things that that I wanted to accomplish when I first set sights on my journey at Microsoft.
That's super interesting. So if I'm hearing right, it's a sort of dining both as a, not just an employee benefit, but a profit center whereby, and is that from selling food or is that mainly just using it as a venue that you're actually proud to bring your customers into?
Yeah, and I think it was both. It's like especially at budget time, I sold it as a profit center, and so that they would invest money and help us have one of the best programs in the world, and be able to experiment with software and with technology. Whereas, if it's some other corporate account in some bank or some law office, you're not going to get to be able to do that. And so yeah, I took advantage of, I guess, that to be able to incorporate software wherever we could. And, kind of getting into the plant situation at Microsoft, you know, um, everything that we did was customer focused. So we listened to our customers constantly, and one of the things that the customers kept saying is, I've got all this land at our campus in Redmond. Why can't we have a farm? And so, I listened and I said, well, here's the deal. I'll put a farm in if you'll manage it, if you'll pull the weeds and do all that kind of stuff. Well, they were all happy about putting the plants in the ground, but when it came to weeding the ground, there was nobody to be seen. And so I stopped that. And then they came to me and said, well, we got all these rooftops. Let's put the farms on the roof, right? And I said, okay, how are you going to get the produce off the roof? You need an elevator. You can't climb down a ladder with big, boxes of produce. So that didn't work. And so I was searching for this way to meet their needs, but that was practical and functional, right? So I was at a flower show and I saw these tower gardens, and it was like, like the Holy Grail had just hit me, because these were tower gardens that they're a square meter in space. You can grow indoors, so you don't have to worry about where how you're moving the produce, or the water supply and all that kind of stuff. This seemed to be solve it. So we put one or two of these in just to kind of, and in the picture here, you can see they have a cover on them. With the first ones we put in didn't have a cover, and we ended up kind of trying to teach the local health department that, here's something that you should be aware of because we're doing it, and is it going to fit into the health laws? And so they helped us, and we decided that we probably should have these covers put on the towers so that people can't reach in, and then it gave us a way to control the lights. And then again, we learned all the way through that these towers put off a lot of light and were blinding our customers. And so we then put some what we call sunglasses, but some sunscreen on the glass there, so that it wasn't quite so bright, but the plants were still getting the light that they needed. And so anyway, we put these in, a couple of them in, and all of a sudden, the software developers that were eating lunch there started looking at this and saying, how can we digitize it? How can we bring Microsoft software into these, tower gardens? And so I'm open. Let's figure it out. How do we do it? And so they took some of them, they put them in what they call the garage, which is where they play with things and build things, and so they put the Internet of Things into these tower gardens. So we were monitoring the pH balance of the water, the amount of water, the nutrients in the water. We put cameras on the plants, so we were watching the plants grow. And then again, all of it was connected to the cloud, and we were able to monitor it from a Surface tablet, right? And so again, we started with a couple in the cafe. We started to expand. I had towers in Australia, in Tel Aviv, in China, in the UK, and I was managing the whole farm from my Surface tablet in Redmond. So it was, it's kind of cool and that sort of thing. And then, as we progressed, we said, well, we should build a farm in our cafes, right? And so that's where we kind of started to take a look at aeroponics and aquaponics and being able to insert those into our cafes. And again, here's some pyramids, the aquaponic pyramids that we had. And then on the top right there is the farm that we had in one of our cafes that had all these lights. We had lights from the ceiling down onto the lettuce. And interestingly enough, it rains in Seattle, is where I'm located, where Microsoft is located. And so when it was in the middle of winter, we had tables around here, and people would actually get attracted to the light because they wanted to, sit close to the plants. And this kind of whole atmosphere started to become and be built around the plants. So it was pretty cool.
I love to see that. Just real quick, I guess, could you put just a timeline on this? Because I know this was a while ago, but when did you start looking into this space? And then I guess one follow-up question there. You mentioned some of the IoT stuff you're doing. Obviously, we do a lot of that at Babylon. So I'm curious, what did you see back then? What was like the main problem you were solving for? And then were there any issues with it as you started developing this and sort of features? Anything you wish existed back then that maybe does exist now?
Well, yeah. So yeah, timeline. I'm trying to remember, you're challenging me here because I don't remember the exact year, but I was probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 years into my 13-year experience. And so, yeah, it was somewhere in the, mid 2000s, I guess, or whatever. Right. So, um, and so, yeah, the challenges, again, we learned as we went. So, like I said, we put the plants up, and then, it's like we scratched our heads and said, "Oh my goodness, the health department's going to want us to do something." So like I said, we put covers around it, and then we learned that they were too bright. So we put, sunglasses around it and that kind of stuff. And then when we got into the technology, I mean, Microsoft is an interesting place because, they work on what they call the growth mentality, and that's fail fast and move on. So they're always testing, they're always doing things to test the software. And because we were in a testing environment with the plants, the customers, they'd see changes in the plant structures and the way we laid the plants out and and they were okay with that because they're used to change. They're used to constantly changing things. And so again, it was a great environment to work in. The problems we were solving was, and in my head from a high strategy standpoint is I wanted to create a machine that you didn't have to go to. And again, that was kind of the premise for all the digitization that we did, and we proved it, right? I mean, we like we said, we got it down to a point where we really needed only to go to the machine when we planted and harvested, and we did those at 2 separate times. Now, looking back at it, I would have incorporated those into the same process. So we would plant and then harvest in the same time. So you only have to go to the machine once. And again, that was the constant, push, I guess, is to try and get it so that the machine would kind of do whatever it needed to do itself. And so we got into dosers. We had to put nutrients into the water, and so we had machines that would read the pH, and when it went a certain level, they'd feed it with some more nutrients. And everything was on timers so that we turned the lights off, and turned them back on. And yeah, that was kind of the high level premise is what we were after.
I think it's so fascinating, right? Because you're talking up to about 20 years ago from now, and then with Babylon, it's been about an 8-year journey to get our products out, and we'll talk about them. But I know firsthand just how hard this is to put all these pieces together and make it easy enough that you're just planting and harvesting. And I think on the outside people think that's easy, but there's a lot going on under the hood. So I can't even imagine what it was like 20 years ago trying to cobble together the pieces to make that possible. And I had a question just in terms of how much like development time was it very iterative? Like how many engineers did you have working on? Any costs estimates? Do you know if does that recall for your memory?
Well, yeah, the cost estimates were zero. I mean, we had engineers running all over the place, and they were always excited about doing something new or something interesting, something that may have some, energy to be able to hopefully, add software to it to be able to, sell more software, right? And so yeah, I mean, it was, looking back at it, I got bounced around to a lot of different engineers, but it was because they talked to each other. And, this guy would say something like this, and this lady would do this. And all of a sudden they bring, oh, well, we know this guy that does this. And we, brought it all in and so there was always energy around what we were doing. And then I met an engineer. His name is Ranveer Chandra, and he was working on the dirt side of farming, and I was working on the water side of farming, if you will. And so we had a lot of collaboration that we did with him, and it took us into some really, really crazy places that I never thought I would ever go to. And that's how I learned about aquaponics was fish. And then also there was a plant that they had in the idea center that would talk to you. So this is really, really early AI. But what happened is you walk up to this plant that was in a case. Florence was her name, and Florence had an attitude. So you walk up and say, "How you doing today, Florence?" And she'd say, "Well, look at me. I'm in this high humidity location and you think I'm doing just fine. Well, I'm not. It's hot in here and it's really wet in here." And so she had this banter going on with the user. And so it's just stuff like that that started to kind of come out of the woodwork with, me just putting plants out in the dining room at one point, and that's kind of where it went. And it took me into just some crazy, crazy places. I mean, I got hooked up with the USDA, and they wanted me to come to DC and do some presentations to them about what I was doing with vertical farming. And so I started talking to them, and everybody was really interested in what I was doing with water and and the machine and all the technology that was involved in it. And that then I because of the USDA and what they do with the Native Americans, yeah, I got into meeting a lot of kind of important people that were involved in the government, right? So again, when Al Gore came to Microsoft, I showed him my machine, and yeah, it was just, we spent probably 20 minutes talking about, this machine before he went up on stage. And same thing with Madeline Albright. And then one just very special guest that I got to be with was Jane Goodall. And it was interesting talking to her because she didn't care much about the plants. She cared about what we were doing with aquaponics and the fish. And I think there's a picture I think that shows that these fish are swimming around in this little container. And she pulled me over as we were looking at it. She pulled me over and she said, "Look at this fish tank." She said, "Do you think those fish are happy?" She said, "Why don't you put something in there where they can hide and be fish instead of just swimming in this water?" And it's like, boom, it was just, anyway. So I really resonated with Jane, and we became really close friends. And it's just fantastic what she was doing. But yeah, this thing with with growing plants just opened up so many doors that I never thought existed.
Well, I think it's amazing, and obviously, 2 decades ago, whenever, or a decade ago, whenever you were starting, and this was kind of reaching maturity, the trend has been massive. And I guess for those listening, who maybe don't know what hydroponics or hydroponics is growing plants in water. There's no soil, and you control the nutrients, the irrigation. It means you can grow plants quicker using less water
Yeah.
without pesticides indoors all year round. So it has a lot of advantages. And then aquaponics is where you use fish to actually fertilize the plant. So it's almost even more closed loop. So both of those things have massive tailwinds. And I think, certainly Mark, in the time you've been doing it, but we've benefited from it a lot at Babylon, where in the last few decades, the falling cost of sensors, falling cost of compute, these have been huge benefits to this industry. And we're now seeing this amazing proliferation of indoor farms, big and small. And so I guess leading on to kind of the next part of our talk, am curious, just as you built these farms from scratch by hand, added all these features using Microsoft's engineering talent, what did you learn during that process? And I guess also from the eyes of Microsoft and the people kind of investing in this, what were the main benefits that you saw for the communities that these farms served?
Yeah, you talked about aquaponics, and at Microsoft, we had a huge sustainability initiative, around a lot of it around food waste. Um, and we were working with farmers to try and help them, get rid of their ugly produce. We called it the Ugly Produce Rescue, and so anyway, there's this huge initiative around sustainability, and so when we started messing with aquaponics, as you say, the fish fertilized the plants. And we were doing some work with black soldier flies. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with black soldier flies, but they're a non-pest fly that in larva state eats about, I don't know, 8 to 10 times its weight in garbage. And then if it becomes a fly, it lives for 4 days and it mates and dies. And so we started messing with black soldier fly larvae uh, to the tune of millions of these bugs. But anyway, when they reached the end of their larva state, we blanched them, so we boiled them, and it became fish food and chicken food. Okay. And so now we had this circular economy of sustainability going on in the fish. We're feeding the plants were feeding the flies, and the flies were feeding the fish. So there was this closed loop circular economy and so that intrigued me. And so and again, we did a lot of other things around circular economies at Microsoft, but that was one of the big learnings that I was and again, all this stuff started to kind of fall into place as more doors opened. Like I said, the USDA, and then the USDA took me to the Native Americans, and so we started working with the Native Americans, and then the aquaponics took me to the black soldier flies, and so we got into all this stuff started to kind of happen around that. And again, what I've seen since that point in time is that just the growth. I mean, similar to what you're doing, now there's these, farms all over the world that you're doing, and you've got the technology, and it's just, for me, it's heartwarming to see that it's continuing on and that people are actually using it and it's becoming successful. Because, that was one of the things is that, we were playing and we had the resources to be able to do that. And so, everybody that came and visited and saw our stuff said, yeah, this is great. You can do it at Microsoft because you got money coming out your ears, but how can I do it and how can I make it successful? And again, I think it's people like you, Alexander, that, have looked at it and said, hey, yeah, let's make it successful. So I commend you for taking the ball and running with it.
I appreciate that a lot, but I'd return the compliment if someone like yourself hadn't had the initial kind of idea and been playing around and sort of hit some proof points. You know, for a lot of people, I think just seeing is believing, right? So once you've done that, I'm sure it set off a chain reaction out there for other folks to start trying. And, you know, we at Babylon have certainly been a beneficiary of just the growth in the space. There's a lot of innovation. And as I mentioned, like the falling cost of technology and LED lights, some of these things that I
Yeah,
think have lined up very well with our entry into the world. And yeah, we're now coming up to 250 active farms around the US.
awesome.
And we're scaling it. And, you know, same as you were looking at your farms around the world with your iPad, we've got a central control system running all of these farms. It's super satisfying to see. And so I see this one plugged in here. It'd be remiss not to mention LinkedIn because I think this was one of your last projects. Would you be able to give kind of just a quick overview of why you wanted to start farming again at LinkedIn, which I guess was a new-ish role at the time, and maybe just sort of what this program represented compared to that one at Microsoft?
Yeah, you know, again, I had this passion when I left Microsoft, and I indicated earlier that when I left Microsoft, I went to Ford, you know, I carried on the torch, I guess, but I kind of moved to dirt farming when I was at Ford. Henry Ford was a farmer at heart, and there's a lot of land, Ford land, around Dearborn and Detroit and Michigan itself. And so you know, I started to work with a Ford farmer, and we started to, you know, do organic farming, which was a little bit foreign to him. So we had to do some education there. But you know, we transitioned the farm, and then we used the produce in our cafe program. And so when I got back to LinkedIn, I thought, you know, here's an opportunity to continue with the water farming, if you will, or hydroponics. And so, you know, when you and I met, it was like, yeah, this is great. Let's start to, you know, explore this and bring it in. And again, I didn't have quite the resources at LinkedIn that I had at Microsoft. And so, you know, when you brought forward a solution, I thought, yeah, let's introduce LinkedIn to these. And you know, and we put them in, and as you can see, the chefs, you know, go wild over this kind of stuff, but also the customer. And you know, what happened at LinkedIn was the same thing that happened at Microsoft. When we put these in, they're all lit up, they're pretty, they're beautiful, they're growing, and you know, people can watch them grow. And you know, people come by, and in this day and age, they all turn and take a selfie, right? And then they send the selfie to everybody else and say, look what LinkedIn's doing, right? And so it starts to proliferate. So yeah, it was kind of, to me, the natural thing to do based on my background and where, you know, what I was working on. And you know, like I said, at Ford, I was more into dirt farming, but you know, they have the Michigan Central train station that they just remodeled, and it just opened. But in the early stages of that, I had greenhouses hooked onto the train station, so that when people would walk from where they park their car, they'd walk past the greenhouses, growing hydroponically and growing vertically, and watch the lettuce grow. And I had it separated so that, you know, you had one section that was elementary kids and how they took care of their garden, and then middle school, the high school, and then college. And so there was this progression of things that were going on in each one of the greenhouses as you walk to work. And so you start to see the lettuce grow, and then you know, and again, you know, you and I've talked that I started playing games with this. So you know, I said, what if we named the lettuce Sally? And you watch Sally grow from just this little pod to, you know, a head of lettuce. And now, you know, Sally all of a sudden shows up on the salad bar. So there's starts to be this kind of emotional connection to the plant, right? And so, you know, we started doing some really kind of crazy stuff. But so then as I moved into LinkedIn, it was, you know, again, like I said, it was a natural progression to kind of go back into the vertical growing. I pitched some ideas about greenhouses and how we could, you know, we could feed the community if we wanted with the leftovers that we weren't using to produce the food in the LinkedIn cafes. And so, you know, there were some, I don't know, philanthropy, the kind of things that I started to think about, you know, about feeding high school or grade school kids with the leftovers, the lettuce that we weren't using, so we would overproduce and be able to, you know, help the community out and that sort of thing. So yeah, there was all kinds of different things that, you know, where that took us.
I love hearing about it. I gotta say, so we are actually in Michigan Central Station in the new project. We're in
That's
there.
that's
Uh,
so cool.
seems like everywhere we go, I should just follow where you've been and we can. But I think one thing you said there that really stood out to me, and I think we hear this a lot, is especially in the corporate dining environment, right? There's a big push towards sustainability,
Yeah,
circularity, but actually a lot of the hard work that's going on there for you and your teams and the people running these buildings is often overlooked. And it's actually very hard to convey that to the end consumer, who's also the one who needs to see it and benefit from it. And I think that's where the on-site farming can really bridge that gap. And we like to say we're part of the solution, right? We want people growing outdoors in greenhouses, you name it. We want all of that stuff because I think a
yeah,
more localized supply chain is better for everyone. But actually bringing some of that produce growing on site can create that bridge and help actually educate the end consumer. And we see that like that image in LinkedIn. They literally had like teaching kitchen demos around the farm and they're harvesting, tasting,
yep,
making food.
yep,
And I think that is like a really captivating experience that's actually going to help change
yep.
consumption habits and hopefully, bring everyone around to better dining practices.
Yeah. And again, I go back to Microsoft, and um, I had the opportunity because of the press that we were getting. I had the opportunity to go over to Milan and speak at the World Expo, and that was in 2015. And at that point in time, the whole expo was built around feeding the world in 2050 when there's 10 billion people on the planet. And so this was the Microsoft was sponsoring the USA Pavilion, so I got to go over and show my farm at the Milan Expo, and then wander around the different countries expos that were going on. And I just got this idea. You kind of you dream, I dream, and it's like some of these dreams are outlandish, like we could feed the world. That's like, but as I walked around, I said, we can feed the world, but it's not going to just be, hydroponics and vertical growing. It's going to be land growing. It's going to take that much energy to feed the planet when there's 10 billion people on it, right? And so, I did my speech and I stepped off stage, and of course, the Italian press had their, microphones right in my face, and they said, what about the farmers? What about the farmers? And I said, well, we can live together on this planet, and it's going to take all of us to produce enough food to be able to feed the planet. And so I got deeply involved in that, and I'm convinced with products like what you've got, and in our case, the tower was a square meter, right? And there's a lot of empty square meter spaces in an office building that you could put a farm and not disrupt the work environment, not disrupt anything, but feed the planet, right? And so there's all this thing that started to kind of multiply, and it was, like I said, it was just an incredible experience to be able to think that something you do could actually work.
You are in many ways a forefather of what we now call on-site vertical farming. So I think that you've done some pioneering work there, and
Yeah,
it is
thanks.
interesting. Like we hear it time and time again, sort of, is this going to be enough? Is it going to feed people? And it's like this is all part of the solution. And as you said, there is a ton of empty office space, particularly these days when people haven't
Yes,
even gone back to the office. Like,
that's right.
why don't we convert some of that space into something that's going to captivate people's imaginations and feed them at the same time?
Exactly, exactly. And I got it. Again, I got into that a little earlier too, is that, when we were exploring the aquaponics world, there was a building that was supported by the city government in The Hague in the Netherlands. And we went and visited. The top floor was a greenhouse and had all the vertical farming going on. But then the floor right below it was where they put all the fish. And so they pumped this water up into the into the greenhouse to feed the plants. And the interesting thing for me, and where I got the idea of helping the community, was is that this was sponsored by the city government, and it was a way to bring healthy food into the schools, right? And so that's the way that they were doing it. And again, this was way before anybody was thinking about this kind of stuff. And so it was like, it was cool to be able to say, this is where things could go if it all works out. So yeah, it's just again, I keep saying it's incredible, but it is.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating to see the different use case, and I think that's one thing we found is like everywhere we go, we're having to educate the market and help them understand what is this thing and how are we going to use it. And I think it is, not many people have the vision that you had to actually build it and figure it out, right? A lot of people don't want that. They want to be told, this is what you can grow, this is when you harvest, and we're trying to do that. And I think some of the things you mentioned there, like we're actually doing different like donation programs. We work with Goodwill and other nonprofits, and it kind of speaks volumes to the fact that growing food is something that humans have done for forever,
Yeah,
and that actually there are so many ways to do it. And these farms are a tool for education and for feeding people, and they can go really wherever people want them to go.
exactly. Exactly.
Um, so I'm just looking at the time here. I know we could talk for hours, and I would love to do that, hopefully another time. But I guess just some sort of closing thoughts. You've built these amazing farms at Microsoft. You've worked with us at LinkedIn. Where do you see on-site farming kind of now and into the future? And if you were getting back in the saddle at a corporate dining facility, what would you recommend to anyone who's looking at starting to grow their own food?
Yeah, I mean, where's the future of this? I mean, you talked a little bit about it earlier. There's a with COVID, we had no idea that was going to show up, and based on that, there's a lot of empty building space out there now. A lot of real estate that's for sale. And again, I'm thinking just like you're thinking, why can't we turn that into a farm? And then some groups have tried, and I don't know if you have or not yet, or maybe it's on your roadmap, but bringing growing into the home, the residential home. And, I, the, if you can make it easy for the homeowner that they don't have to do anything other than watch it grow and harvest it and maybe replant, it's like that's to me something that would be really popular. And so I again, you're smiling because I think maybe you're working on that or you've already got it. So
One day, one day.
okay. Um, then you know, I'm still on this bandwagon of circular economies, and as AI is growing, it it's taking a huge amount of energy in data centers to produce all this AI stuff. And again, I had an opportunity when I was in Amsterdam, to visit a Microsoft data center. And the waste from a data center is heat and CO2. And right across the street from the data center was a greenhouse, like a 4-acre greenhouse. It was huge. They were growing tomatoes in there. And at the time, there was no robotics for picking tomatoes or planting tomatoes or running a greenhouse. But again, my thought was take the heat or the waste from this data center and put it into a greenhouse that doesn't have humans in it because humans can't deal with the CO2. And then you could grow tomatoes quicker, but you could also grow them to a recipe. So you could grow them to, a soft-skinned, sweet, easy to cut, healthy tomato. And so you could kind of start to play with that. And again, then there isn't this waste of heat and there isn't this waste of CO2 that comes off the data centers. And I'm guessing that that has progressed even more because there's more data centers and there's more power being generated for all these servers to be able to crunch these ones and zeros. And so, the waste from that can be used to kind of use it to grow food, right? So those are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about for the future.
Oh yeah, it's so exciting, and I think there are a couple of things you mentioned there. Like we know of some utility companies here in Virginia and elsewhere around the U.S. who are using indoor farms as a way to level load the grid, right? So you can turn
Yeah,
the farms on in the dead of night, things like that, which is a
yeah,
fascinating use case. And I love that idea of using the kind of excess heat and CO2. We need a lot more of that. And in the same breath, all of the progression in AI is going to allow for much more programmable environments, right? And we're seeing that now, this whole idea of phenotyping, right? And can we adjust the environment to produce certain outcomes in a given genetic strain or crop? And we're
yeah,
I think that's the future. We have played around with stuff now. A lot of it's just focused on getting it to work and getting it to the right price point, to be honest. But
Yeah.
over time, I think it's definitely where it heads. And it's so exciting to think about the opportunities from a nutrition standpoint and from an education point when you're not dependent on stuff that's been shipped 1,500 miles. It's
Yeah.
bred for shelf life and durability, but
Yeah.
you can start optimizing for flavor. You not start optimizing for nutrition. I think that's a really exciting.
Exactly, exactly. And again, it's healthier. I think one of the major things that I think is coming is food as medicine. And when when you start to fix people's bodies because they're eating right, it causes change, right? So
That's the hope. Well, Mark, with that note, is there anything you'd like to close on here? I know you're on a new chapter with consulting. Where can people find you?
yeah, I'm at Mark.Freeman at Day One Consulting, day1hc.com. So and yeah, I'm staying close to the industry, the food service industry, which I love. And we're having a gas of a time, and I get to continue to see what's on the horizon for the whole industry. So yeah, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you having me on here. I mean, this is great. It's fantastic what you're doing, and again, I'm a fan of what's going on, and just carry the torch and keep it going, man.
Thank you. Well, all right. And on that note, Mark, I'd like to say thank you so much for participating in our webinar today. I hope this has given people a little bit of insight into the past and present of indoor farming and where things are heading in the future. Thank you for your time, and we will wrap things up there.
Okay. Thank you for having me.